Today's panel is all about AI. I don't need to tell you much about this. It's very difficult to see headlines that do not have the word AI in it today. LinkedIn, Twitter, all the social media are populated by conversation about AI. So when we decided to do this panel, we really started to think about focusing on AI in the world of work. As you know, the Master in Business Administration is about business. And so for us, it was very important to really understand what's the application of AI in business. There are many, many questions that we have unanswered. We're going to start today with a bit of a generalist debate, really starting to understand some terminology because the field is moving so fast that really many of us are staying behind, right? So there is a massive lag between what's actually happening in these pockets of reality and what actually the understanding, the broader understanding, societal understanding is. So we're going to try to close the gap to start with by having, I'm going to ask a question to each of our guests, and then we are going to move to a conversation about AI and ethics in the second part, and then I would like to leave some time for questions, because I'm sure you have some questions that you would like to have answered. So my first question for Simon Greenman is, give a bit of clarity on terms, particularly on what we speak about AI, AGI, which is generative AI, LLM models, ChatGPT models, therefore. Gotcha. Give us a little bit of a broad view on all this.
And stop me, because I could go on for quite a while.
Okay, I'm going to time you.
Yeah, time me on this one. But yeah, it's full of acronym soup, and it can be quite confusing. AI is broadly, and there's a lot of philosophical debates, but basically it's replicating human intelligence, cognition, hearing, seeing, reasoning, that sort of thing. And AI has always sort of been broken down into this debate of AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, and narrow AI. And AGI is that question of when do machines become more intelligent than us? When do they have common sense and take over, and then the robots come and kill us, that sort of thing. The AGI debate, I actually think, is a distraction, because what we really should focus on right now is narrow AI, which is when AI is used for specific tasks. And if you pick up your phone here, facial recognition or Siri, that is narrow AI. It's doing a task, it recognizes your face, it's doing speech to text. And what's happened for narrow AI over the past 10 years is deep neural networks, these huge neural networks that you train and learn, have really been working for the first time and fulfilling its promise. And these neural networks are very good at prediction. So they're used and we'll get into it, used to predict, are you a good candidate for a company? Forecast a supply chain and things like that. So we've had 10 years of predictions that get better. But then last December, ChatGPT, which is the fastest to 100 million users by anyone, suddenly comes out of nowhere, and we're all going, what the hell is this thing? ChatGPT sort of moves us from predictions to creating content that we normally associate as something of a human capability. So it's creating text, but it's much more than that. Images, sound, audio, motion, marketing and sales. It's creating whatever. And behind this is, what are the models to build this technology? And you hear about large language models. They're just big, huge text models that sucked up everything from the internet, about 500 billion words, sort of found patterns, compressed it, and then they spit it out again. And we'll get into the problems of spitting it out. And those are large language models. But large language models are an example of foundational models. And foundational models are not only text, but images, sound, audio. So you're going to hear a lot about large language models and a lot about foundational models. And I'm sure we're going to be talking lots about it.
Great, wonderful, thank you very much. And tell us a little bit more about the word generative that we hear, Simon, still with you. A little bit more about the word generative AI. Yeah. What do we mean when we hear that? There is a lot of talk about generative AI.
Well, generative AI is actually the right word. It generates content.
Okay, that's the word.
And the way to think about that is you type in a prompt, type in text into ChatGPT, what's the meaning of life, and it would generate an answer. Or if you're a student, you get an essay question, you type it in, and it will spit out an answer. Sorry for the educators.
Don't laugh that much about that.
But you can type in a text to image. So I'd like a picture of a university with the students smiling on a sunny day, and it would generate a nice image for you. So it's really that generation capability, which we associate with human capabilities. We never thought machines would actually exceed our capabilities in creative areas.
And I know we are going to go to ethics later on, but on this generative bit, what's the main contention here?
Contention in terms of?
What's coming up that is problematic? What people say? I mean, this could be a good thing, right?
Problematic. I mean, educators are just struggling with this worldwide, but I think we're going to get into the whole ethical debate later.
Yeah, okay, then fine. We'll leave it with that.
It hallucinates. It makes up stuff. It's biased, it's toxic, and it disseminates.
Okay, we're going to keep this for later.
Exactly.
Keep this for later.
Told you.
All right. Sam, sorry, I'm going to go to Rachel now. So Rachel, how are these technologies changing the way we work? Can you bring us practical examples? That I know you work with some practical examples. So if you can be broad first and then maybe dive into some examples.
Sure, yeah. Some of the sort of statistics or predictions that you hear from the consulting firms talk about 40% of all working hours being transformed by large learning models. So if you think of your average day working, nearly half of it could be transformed by an LLM. There's also talk about 300 million jobs being transformed by LLMs, and this is really significant stuff. When you look at a positive approach to that and you think optimistically, when you look at books like Human and Machine, Future of AI, what you hear about is research that's done into things like customer service. And on this particular piece of research, what they did is they looked at all of the tasks that a customer service representative might do. And what they found is a third of those tasks could be potentially automated, a third could be augmented, and a third would have no impact. So it's interesting to think about that piece of research because the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, spoke recently about customer service being one of the most impacted areas. And he talks about there'll be significantly fewer jobs very soon. But this report takes a more optimistic view. And they say, also 4 tasks might be created. And those kind of tasks would be, how do you work with the AI? How do you monitor the AI? How do you make sure that the quality is there? So it could create new tasks. It could also create new roles where you're interacting and monitoring the AI and making it better. So I think that's really interesting to think about what those roles might be. One of the most popular roles recently, and Simon mentioned prompting earlier, is a prompt engineer. So somebody that can write really good prompts for a large learning model. And that can be things like saying to the large learning model, imagine you're a 10 years professor that's been teaching AI, explain to me how an LLM would work. So that's an example of a prompt. You use that and you'll get a much better result from the AI. Other examples then, sort of more how it might generally change the way people are working. When you look at Morgan Stanley, they've implemented a chatbot based on GPT-4. And this is confined to content that they have. So this bot only works on content they have approved, only works on their intellectual capital. But what they're seeing is that tasks that a financial advisor might do, things that might normally take 30 minutes, can actually now take 3 seconds. So this chatbot can go through hundreds and thousands of pieces of information. It might be customer information, it might be information on asset classes, and it can search for that, it can synthesize it, it can provide an insight in seconds to a financial analyst. So we're really seeing these impressive kind of changes to the speed at which you can get information. So I think really in summary I would say you're going to get boosts in performance, that's going to change how we work. We're going to see much better speed at the way that we can retrieve things, and our jobs might change. We might be more thinking about jobs as a hybrid between how we interact with the AI rather than a traditional, just human-focused role.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Just proving that I did a great job in moving from banking into academia. Because I did the job very quickly. Thank you very much for that, Rachel. Sam, I will have a question for you as well.
Yep.
So you work in more of a consultancy, so you advise clients about the use of these technologies within the organizations. So from our perspective, I think an interesting thing that I would like to know from you is sitting in the seats of people here that are thinking to move to work with AI, right? What do clients want to know? I mean, clearly you have one of these new jobs, right? You have one of the new jobs
Yep.
that has been created because the AI is now coming around, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's super interesting to hear your perspective. You also, I know that you got into this job just last year, right? So
Pretty
tell
fresh.
us all about it. Tell us all
Yeah.
about what the market looks like, but also what do you hear from clients?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, glad to. So Mesh primarily focus on highly regulated companies. So focus on financial services, a focus on other highly regulated industries like the energy and transport industries. I think a lot of them, stakeholders at each of those big organisations are very aware of AI in the marketplace. They're aware of it as a sort of a frontier technology, although it's been around quite a while. The way it is developing is rapidly increasing in terms of what it's capable of. I think a number of the stakeholders I've spoken with at various organisations are keen to get on board, almost like a train they want to jump on and not be left behind. And I think various technology sort of advancements like the adoption of cloud technology some years ago, banks, for example, who dragged their heels a little bit, did get left behind by startup fintech organisations who are able to natively build their banking applications on the cloud, for example. So a lot of the larger, older, well-established companies are keen to jump on board. But if I'm being honest, they don't really have an idea of how. They don't know, in terms of use cases, where to focus their attention. They don't know where to start. So, we're approached by some of the biggest sort of FTSE companies who come to us and say things like, "We want AI, do it for us. Come in and make it happen, make AI happen." Which is a pretty vague and vast mission. So the way we...
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
This is super interesting because I work for some of these very big companies and I also work for another very big company now. Well, it's not a company, but it's a university, right? So and I study organization. So I'm familiar with how difficult it is to adapt for organizational structures, right?
Yep.
Especially the bureaucracy saves us because it helps us have governance. It helps us, move things around, thousands of people that work for us, but it also creates some structures that are difficult to break.
Yep.
So what's your advice? What are you seeing? How are these companies interacting with this?
Yeah, sure. I'm finding that there are, as you probably would imagine, a few stakeholders are super keen, abreast of the technology, know what it's capable of, but the majority of employees are predominantly fearful of how it may impact their jobs, as you probably understand, not knowing whether your job is going to be automated or just assisted or transformed, as Rachel was saying. I think I'm going into these organisations and reassuring them. I think the mission and the approach should be internally communicated by the clients, the leadership in that company. They should set the tone of the engagement. But in every engagement I've worked with so far in the short time I've been doing it, they haven't been looking to automate people out of roles. That is not on the cards at all, which is quite reassuring coming in as an external consultant to know that you can reassure the people and say, your job will change, but it will still be here. Primarily, I think the missions that they're looking to accomplish first are things like implementing systems that can help those people make data-driven decisions, recommendations. When we were speaking earlier, I heard the word co-pilot mentioned, something we look to implement in an example like a customer servicing environment, the ability to provide that person with more tools and insights that can help them provide better service to the people that they're serving. They're all small use cases that we would focus on, but primarily when other companies have reached out to us and we've engaged with them, we go in and do a short short discovery phase and then come out with a list of potential use cases that we then put to them and say, what would you like us to pursue, if any? And everyone I've worked on so far, the ones that have been selected have not been anything the company has suggested themselves, which I think is just representative of how quickly the technology is changing and how little they...
Can you give an example of that?
Cool.
Without clearly being client specific.
Sure, yeah, sure. So I think one of the I can definitely talk to one of the main themes, which is I think quite relevant to this, which is circling around the data. So I think a lot of the AI conversations focus on the model, the algorithms, what goes into developing that model.
Yeah.
And some companies like OpenAI do a great job of focusing on that. But one thing perhaps we talk about more in the ethics area is that the data that feeds that model can have a much bigger impact on the output than the model itself. So there are companies that say, you come in, automate this for us, we want AI, we want this. But their actual data maturity, the landscape that we're going into is not organised, the data's not accessible, they might not have any governance, the data quality is very poor. And that can have an enormous impact on the output. So
sorry, I'm going to ask another question. This is super interesting. So are you saying that one of the potential new jobs that is going to help take place in the future is actually organising data?
100%. Now, AI can do that organisation to some extent. That there are tools, there are solutions that can sort data, organise it, check quality of data as it flows through. But fundamentally, a company that's existed for potentially hundreds of years, their data landscape, having gone through numerous IT and tech transformations, is quite a mess.
Okay, great. Great, thank you so much. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about ethics. We've already spoken about the fact that, so one thing that is happening in our society is that when we don't know something, we become afraid of it. And let's face it, this conversation is so complex. There are many, many things we don't know. So one of the, you might all remember that famous letter, which I call the letter, which was this letter that was written 3 weeks ago, which was then signed by Elon Musk, Steven Wozniak, and many other people who were actually saying, let's slow down with AI. And, there are all sorts of controversy behind the letter because some of the people who were signing the letter were then launching their AI platform. So there might be all sorts of reasons why they were asking to slow down. But there is a sense that the technology is proceeding far faster than we can actually imagine how to regulate or how to respond to it, right? So what are your reflections on this? When we're gonna clearly slide into the ethics conversation, but this is having an impact on all of us, which is filtered by this not knowing, by this fear. What's your reflection on that?
Yeah, I mean, the right word is fear, and AI has always sort of swung between a utopian, it's going to save the world, to a dystopian, it's going to take over. And as you say, it's the problem with AI, it's becoming so complex that we don't know what's going to happen and we're afraid of it. But that letter that was about 3 weeks ago was basically saying, look, large language models are becoming so complicated. Let's pause the development of more complicated models and let's focus on how we put guardrails and safety around it, because the fear's coming out of it. And you can read OpenAI's, it's called System Card. You can go through and you can actually read, and it will tell you the problems that they've identified for it. So first one is it hallucinates, which it makes up stuff, and you don't know if it's true or if it's not true. It then talks about toxicity, because you've got to remember these models, what they do is they hoover up all the content of the internet. If you go to the far reaches of the internet, there's some pretty nasty stuff, some pretty nasty people. So it hoovers it up and it spits it back out. So you get toxicity, misogyny, violence, and all of those sort of things. It's, to your point, it can be extremely biased, because guess what? Society and humans are biased, and it reflects and amplifies all those. But the fear is, where's this going to lead? And one of the big examples is disinformation. So the next year there's the US election coming up, and instead of sort of Russian troll farms spreading disinformation, imagine there's 1 million machines that can spit out human-level content within seconds, spread it around, and suddenly this disinformation becomes uncontrollable and it comes back. What do we do in a modern democracy and society when it becomes uncontrollable? So there's some very, very valid fears around that. And so the question is, what can we do? Regulation always lags innovation, except if you're Italian, because the Italians on the back of
privacy
this...
law.
Yeah?
They suspended ChatGPT.
Yeah, they suspended it.
On the back of privacy laws.
Yeah. And you'll probably see that other European countries under GDPR will use the same law to actually say, if big tech is not going to be responsible and sort out these problems, then we're going to step in as regulators. So there's a lot of questions around regulation coming in. EU is probably leading with the EU AI Act, which will come in this year. China, which has already said disinformation, if you do that, we're going to basically put you in jail, because they worry about the stability of the society there. So they've actually got the furthest ahead in terms of laws, which reflects their culture. The US, as always, it's much more of a federal state, so it leaves it to the states to come up with stuff, and then eventually at the federal level. So a lot of regulation about to happen, but should we be concerned as society? I'm not worried about it. Artificial general intelligence is becoming smarter than us. I worry about how it can destabilize society and democracies. So.
Great. Very interesting. So I'm going to go to Rachel to maintain, in the spirit of maintaining the order, but it could be at this point really, I'd like to open the panel, so whoever wants to answer. So any more considerations on ethics? What do you see it from your side? Let's dive into the clearly societal conversation. Let's dive into the business. What do you see from your perspective as product developer?
Well, I think companies are very worried about their intellectual property. They're worried about data breaches, they're worried about losing control of their IP. A lot of employees have inadvertently perhaps been experimenting with GPT-4 and putting private company information through GPT-4 in those experimentations. And it's knowing that once you do that, that's information that OpenAI have. It's, you're giving away your data in that sense. So I think companies are very mindful of that. If they just use GPT-4, then they could open themselves to all sorts of risks. So, one of the major ways that companies can move forward is by making sure that what they do is they retrain the technology for their specific data, and they keep it bound and constrained. So that's one way they can do that. But obviously that requires funding in terms of being able to retrain these models. Some estimates about retraining, aren't too bad, but I saw one report from Snorkel AI which talked about an approximate cost of somewhere between £2,000 and £7,000 to retrain an LLM to do complex legal classification. So companies, they're very worried about privacy. I think as an individual, the way I've tried to approach it, and I guess I bring this up even though you probably want me to talk about business, but yes. I approached it when I found out about AI and how it was going to impact us when I was doing my MBA. The way I approached that is I felt a responsibility to get involved, to find out more. And, with the resurgence of LLMs and ChatGPT-4, I find myself, again, wanting to come back to the code, experimenting more technically with what's going on. And I feel afraid doing that. It's hard to do, but you've got to, I guess, what I would implore everybody to do is to try to find out more and know that there's a lot of resources out there that can make it really easy, actually. And those technologies like GPT-4 can actually empower you and help you on that learning journey. So I think Sam was saying, sometimes you feel like you don't know a great deal about AI. I also often feel the same way. So it's just knowing that that's okay, and getting in there. And I think the more people that empower themselves, that learn more, the more that we can have an informed stance around what's happening and come together to be, at the table, so to speak.
So it's very reassuring to hear that you don't feel you know much, because that's exactly how we feel, right, about it. So there is hope. So Sam, any more comments on this ethics perspective? And from your standpoint, as someone that speaks to client about this, do they raise ethics concerns?
Oh yeah. I think just like everyone's mentioned so far, I think if you don't know something very well, then naturally you have concerns. There might be information you've read online, scare stories, etc., that are at the forefront of their mind. Fortunately, it's not preventing them engaging in the conversations and speaking with specialists to actually understand the art of the possible. The kind of things, to go back to the ethics sort of framework, one of the examples that I think our Chief AI Officer used at a recent performance roadshow that we did around biases, based on the content or data that flows through from the internet or on an internal system, for example, on a generative AI used to create art effectively or produce images from the information that was hoovered up. He uses the example, and some people wince at this, but I'll say it nonetheless. Type in schoolboy, and you get a picture of schoolboys, roughly 12 years old, usually white, usually in a classroom with a smile on their face. You're doing the schoolboys. If you type in schoolgirls, you get pornography. So, and we're talking about predominantly, on average, most of the images that will be spat out would be considered pornography, or at least soft pornography. And that's just based on the data that's hoovered into the model. So when we talk about ethics, guardrails, frameworks, an innocent person typing in schoolgirls for an image they might use on a project, or a stock image for a website, they're without a clear framework, guardrails, that kind of thing. That's what any user who's using it would be open to.
That's quite interesting. They almost reveal the unconscious within the internet, right? That's you never know what comes up.
Yep.
So that's super interesting. So I have done some study on AI now. I'm not an engineer at all. I am what I would say either a social psychologist or a microsociologist. So I study relationship at work. And the study that I did on AI was interviewing people that were interviewed for their own jobs by AI-led job interviews. And I was not interested in the code at all. I was interested in the experience of these job seekers, who actually were mostly people who graduated from university and were looking for their first job. So for me, it was super interesting to think about the fact that now this person is at an existential point in which they need to find a job. They've actually just graduated with some debt because they have a UK degree. And therefore, the first encounter they have with the job market is through a screen that asks them question, times them in the answers they can give, and there is no one that gives us cues. So think about your first job interviews when you were your first job, and how important it is to actually speak to a human, right? And our findings are quite interesting. We have articles that were published in the Harvard Business Review so we found that four phenomena. The first phenomenon is that people felt dehumanized. So they were talking to a machine. So they started to behave in a different way than they would if they had spoken to a human. The second one is that they felt that the technology was possibly going to offer a superior selection to the company than a human selection. So they felt dehumanized, but at the same time they glorified this AI, right? So we have this tendency as humans to think that the technology is superior, right? We live in the era of STEM, of numbers, right? And anything that is technological gives us confidence that they know what they're doing. Which we actually found out that the AI for job interviews is extremely bad. I mean, face recognition is extremely poor as the clock, right?
Well, now finish.
There are different. The one that we tested.
Because you're talking about my client.
I'm talking about your client 1 year ago or 2 years ago.
Okay.
They may have moved forward. And by the way, your client was also forbidden to use face recognition by several federal states. So that's another story as well. Sorry, guys.
Carry on.
So, Anyway, then the other thing that we found out, that they found the experience emotionally exhausting. And any one of us that is in front of a screen of Zoom, that is emotionally very exhausting. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is that there is a lot of ambivalence in how we deal with AI and how we, as humans, experience this technology, right? Would you like to add something?
Yeah, I will. It's very funny. We didn't know this, but you were doing research on one of my clients.
We didn't know this.
We didn't know this until we had a meeting. But the counter side of that is humans are biased. And they are temperamental and they're inconsistent. There's all these studies that judges after lunch, they've had a lunch, will make a much harsher sentence than they were in the morning. And the problem with a lot of HR and recruitment today is if you're getting thousands of CVs and resumes, tens of thousands, 100,000, you're inconsistent in the evaluation. So how about we can actually look at it, it's more inclusive, it's less worried about your social background or the way you present yourself. It's what you say and how you answer questions and how you answer capabilities and gains and assessments. But more importantly, there are organizations that will interview for 100,000 people. And the technology will actually make it fairer and more consistent in the midst of this. And people will feel like they actually might have a better shot. Whereas they might have felt like they'd been excluded before if it was all human-based.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. There is also a paper written by Timnit Gebru and someone else about the fact that some form of AIs that not recognize or recognize in a worse way emotions expressed by women with darker skin. So there is a lot of stuff going on. I mean, it's such uncharted territory that we could just stay here and speak about contradictory information forever. It's such a difficult...
You're talking about... definitely one of the areas you pick up on is emotion detection, facial recognition, which is emotions and how you react on your face is very culturally dependent. Yep. So if you're assessing sales candidates, Americans tend to be more of this big out, and I am American and English, whereas other cultures are more sort of less expressive. If you don't take account of those things, it can be culturally biased, and they picked up on that.
Okay. So, Rachel and Sam, do you have anything about bias or not bias or glorification of AI? I mean, do you have anything to say on this kind of themes?
Well, in terms of whether we glorify it as a society?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the interview, Lex Friedman and Sam Altman from OpenAI interview recently, and they were talking about, are we approaching general artificial intelligence? I definitely, while watching that, felt, wow, this is amazing. We are in a revolution. So I could feel that pull that I was experiencing, and I'm experiencing it now, drawing me to it, thinking about, is it going to be a godlike capability? So yes, I think it's natural to think, great, I've got this friend, I can talk to ChatGPT-4, it's going to reassure me, it's going to give me the answers. So yeah, absolutely. I think as a society we could easily glorify all of this technology. I think it's kind of reassuring, in all of the confusion. And watching that video, it did inspire me to think this is a significant inflection point. This is a revolution. It felt almost like the Prime Minister was delivering an announcement about changes in society, and that they were empowering us to realize what was going on. So,
very interesting. So, Sam, I have a question for you. I am a manager in a company, right? What do I need to know about AI? What do I do? What do you think your clients, your clients are managers in companies, right? What do they understand, what they don't understand? What do you suggest, what would you say they need to do to prepare themselves for this new landscape?
I think across the board it's quite mixed. I think you'll find in some organisations there's a few people who perhaps have an interest, ongoing learning. There are technologists themselves who have, maybe even more understanding than I do, and that's great. I think what I'm finding, certainly in the organisations I've worked with so far, the key decision makers don't understand the technology, which can be a challenge, naturally, especially if there are various voices in the organisation, sounding the horn for it to be bought and invested in. I think that the level that we sort of focus on, the size of companies, they're massive. They don't have internal capabilities big enough or advanced enough to do this by themselves. And it's not a sales plug, but you don't have to work with us. But there are other AI consultancies.
There are going to be consultancy training.
Of course,
there is going to be so much going on.
Of course. So my advice certainly would be to partner with someone who is knowledgeable and qualified and at that frontier and has done it before. What I would say is, when you look at consultancies, plenty of writing papers. Ask, how many times have you implemented this solution before? What practical experience have you got with similar clients with a similar size? Tell me about the use cases. And naturally, some of it will be private. They might not be able to reveal the names of the companies, but in terms of use cases, I think the patterns I've found so far are pretty reusable across even across sectors, from energy, financial services, etc. Planning applications, customer service applications. There's, go on all day about the opportunities, but really going in and highlighting to those stakeholders the possibilities. I think that they get their eyes opened and they're just like, wow, this could be revolutionary for my people and for the processes. So I think that part of the process is really enjoyable, seeing their face sort of light up with what could be possible.
Great.
Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, when we work with clients, and it's building upon a lot what have you said, but best practice is to actually turning sort of AI into reality. It's relatively easy to come up with the ideas, but how do you make it happen? And you hit upon something that's so important, which is, so often you find, especially in large organizations, they don't have the plumbing and infrastructure to actually support AI. And you end up spending 70-80% on plumbing, data labeling and things like that, making sure that data quality. The second thing is the problem with AI is you're not quite sure what you're going to get out the end of it. Managers, executives are going to ask the question, how good is it going to be? And the AI people say, don't know. It depends upon your data, it depends upon your live environment, that sort of thing. So it's really important around how do you set expectations, and probably the best way of doing it is proof of concepts or that sort of thing, and that will give you a sense of how good it will be. How good will it be to interview candidates coming in here, or how good is the computer vision on my manufacturing line? But the problem, the gap I see with executives is they think it's like normal computer programming, and it's going to take 3 months, cost this much. It ain't like that with AI at all.
Right. So they think it's another technological transformation. It's an implementation of a software. That's how they think about it, or a system. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we have 15 minutes to go to the end of the event, and I was wondering if you have questions. This is a great question. What Lucian's bringing in is a super, super interesting perspective, which is the materiality of AI, right? So until now, we've been thinking about this AI if it exists in thin air. But actually, this AI, to be implemented to work, needs to have some materiality, which is memory cards. He was speaking about memory cards. So hardware, or if it's not hardware, it's some kind of hardware that we don't see, like in the cloud, so some kind of remote Arizona hardware. So competition, you were asking a question about competition, about cost, and also about feasibility, right? In terms of, anyone's got an answer.
I would say that there's a difference, so we can separate out the initial training of something like ChatGPT-4. So, billions of parameters, hugely costly to train, very, very long time. We can separate that from what you might think of as a retraining or a fine-tuning, and that would take a lot less resources. There's also other mechanisms in order to change or constrain the model. So you can use things like text embedding, which is a way of being able to kind of access your data, create vector plane from the embedding. So there's different routes to it, but obviously you are raising an excellent point, which is, needless to say, the power of the initial training and hosting those models obviously sits with certain providers. I think you mentioned as well about data. That is a challenging aspect. in my work in conversational AI, companies spend a lot of time looking at data that is, sent out from the chatbot, for example. So in the company that I work for, we took an approach where you would look at the data as it came through from the user, and you would be labeling that data as you go to see, has the machine made the correct prediction? So yes, that human in the loop, that looking at the data as it comes through, making sure the machine's doing the right thing is a really, costly exercise. So when companies do use these models, they need to be thinking about it like machine learning operations, a bit like DevOps. They need to make sure they've got the right infrastructure. They need to make sure they've got all of those things in place. But yeah, there are ways, it doesn't require the extensive retraining, and there are other ways of handling it and constraining it.
Yeah, you're raising a very important point, which is power and economic control of the foundational models. Foundational models are huge. I think it was $12 million to train, as you're saying, GPT-3. So who are going to control those foundational models around the world? We're all going to be able to have startups enabled by it, but the control is, and it looks like increasingly US power. So it's open, and Microsoft just invested $10 billion into OpenAI because the computational requirements are absolutely vast. So you've got Google basically playing here, Microsoft playing here, Amazon, just an announcement here. So the concentration of power is definitely going to be in the US, and actually you're going to have a concentration of culture as well, because most of the models are US-centric, because most of the internet is centric. So there's a real question of geopolitics behind all of this. Now, the other side of it is, well, okay, let's compete with that. What about Europe compete with that? Well, there's startups in the US to do their own large language models to compete with Google. They've raised $1 billion. So if you're going to compete in this space against America, you better have a really big fat checkbook, because otherwise you're just going to be roadkill along the way here. And that's a really serious point for the world, is technology domination coming out of the US.
Yeah. The person that works closely with companies that use AI to interview people in job interviews is sitting here at my left. So some, without disclosing too many proprietary information. Can AI, and this is a question that all my interviewees, by the way, this is a really good question. They asked me, when I was interviewing them, they asked me, what does the AI exactly capture from me, right? What happened to me during that interview, right? What happened to me? And so I know that AI, for example, gets three types of information: facial recognition, right. And I need to understand if this captures body language or body language cues. Vocal recognitions, which is interpreting emotions in the voice, and verbal recognitions, which is the easiest one. It's interpreting words. What's your answer to this question? Can they get cues?
Yeah, just very briefly, there is already a lot of laws about employment, especially in the US, protected classes, age, gender, disability, and things like that. Could companies collect the information? Absolutely. Can you tell gender? Absolutely. Can you interpret emotions? But the question is, do the companies do that? And in a lot of cases, no, because frankly, regulation's coming down on them, and the PR backlash for if you get AI wrong is so bad. So the particular company we're talking about, they did do facial emotion recognition, but the academics just destroyed the company's reputation, and they got rid of it. So in short, the answer is you can train, if you've got the data sets, male, female, emotion, that sort of thing, you can train it to predict pretty much anything. It's a different question of do they or should they, that sort of thing. So I don't know if you've seen that in your work.
Not in interviews. But yeah, I know it's possible. The technology can do it. But again, to touch on a point that Lucian made, I guess it would come back to the cultural question. If we were only interviewing American white men, who usually are the predominance in the data set, the pattern, then I'm sure with quite a bit of accuracy it could do that. But as soon as you introduce more variables.
So a lot of people felt very uncomfortable about having accents. I'm sensitive to that, clearly having an Italian accent. So, it's quite interesting how that works.
one of the projects I'm working on at the moment, very large company, top 15 FTSE, I think, in terms of size. Currently working on a project management / workforce allocation tool. Now, to touch on a couple of points that were made before, going back over their historical data, of which they have 100 years plus, I'm sure, various levels of quality, would take teams of data analysts years to sort through, label in the correct way, flag, tag, etc. A decision that they've made. Bear in mind, this covers procurement, it covers resourcing in terms of the people that are assigned to complete certain tasks. It takes into consideration patterns of how long typical templated jobs will take to complete on a typical day. It can even consider the weather forecast. So if a job is to be taken outside in a certain geographical location, what's the likelihood of rain at that time? Did it rain last year at that time? How does that impact the job? All of these different things which are possible to, the decisions are possible to be made by humans, but could humans make that many decisions that efficiently, that quickly, etc.? It's a great opportunity for them to be assisted by a solution like this. To touch on the data quality part, they have so much historical data that would make the process so efficient if we could consider it all. But in the same way you mentioned, the decision was made just to basically record how effective that model is going forward from implementation, and then it learns from how efficient the process is based on rating scores and metrics that we have assigned. They can change over time as well, but they made the cost decision to draw a line in the sand and say, not the past.
Well, what springs to mind is the fact that you could empower, I suppose, if we think about diversity and we think about all the different learning styles or the different capabilities, strengths and weaknesses of employees, I think it's got the potential to boost up performance around certain things. So I know, for example, Microsoft, they're really going forward with the concept of a co-pilot. So somebody, the AI tool is there to support you. It can help drafting emails. It can automate sending an email to your customer. It can help you in all sorts of ways. And it's there in a low friction, very good UX way. So, it's not going to sort of impede over you. So I guess I sort of think optimistically that, it'll be a good support for people. It will help people, level people up, boost performance. I think it's great for learning as well. When you're trying to learn more technical skills, you look at something like GitHub Copilot, and that potentially can do 40% of the code for you. So you can go to these tools and you can say, write me the code for whatever, or verify this code. So, if you want to get more involved in technical skills, potentially you've got a tool there to help you. So potentially leveling the playing field, boosting up performance, and someone you can rely on to help you 24/7.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just one thing to add, I guess, which is along those sort of lines. If you think you've got if a team exists and they have a particular set of skills, if you can take away the mundane, simple, repetitive tasks from their day, keep the team the same size, just free up their time to focus on the stuff that is actually valuable in terms of the human element, the element that requires the education, the technical skills, the years of experience, allow them to focus on that, and you'll have a huge boost in productivity with no impact to the jobs, the numbers.
So AI is going to do all the tedious admin we really don't want to do in our jobs.
I'd love it to.
That's our hope.
Love it to.
Simon, do you have something to say as a final
just
word?
to add that, I give an example of, within a year there'll probably be 1 billion people using generative AI, because it's going to be in all of our products here. But just a simple example, my uncle-in-law is a Catholic priest in the US, and he's writing great testimonials of GPT-3 because it helps him write homilies. It helps him save time on research. It gives them ideas. And you actually look at the studies, people are more excited about their jobs when they have these tools and co-pilots. But the final point is, I think how AI technologies can really help issues of sustainability and democratize access to healthcare, chatbot healthcare and things like that, and education as well. There's still 2 billion people on the planet that don't have reliable access to internet. So when they have that, it's going to have an amazing impact on improving the quality of people's life.
Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. I hope you found it very interesting. I found it very interesting and I learned so many things. So thank you so much.